She rose from the kitchen chair the moment I walked through the door. She looked at me for about 4 seconds and didn't say a word. Then she said she'd been expecting me. I did not know this woman. I had never seen this house. I had driven 93 miles from Detroit on a Tuesday morning with one plan and one plan only, and standing in that doorway, still holding my truck keys, I understood in about 6 seconds flat that the plan was already over. She said my wife had told her, 11 weeks before she died, that I would eventually come. She said my wife told her not to soften what she was about to say. She turned toward the doorway at the end of the hall. She said, "This is Marcus. He's Renata's son. He's been waiting his whole life for you. I want to tell you what I saw when I looked through that doorway. I want to take my time with it because I have spent the better part of a year trying to find the right words, and I'm still not sure I have them." There was a wheelchair. The man in it was not young. He was 37 years old, and his body had been reshaped by severe cerebral palsy into something that no photograph, no description, no amount of preparation could have readied me for. His neck bent at an angle that looked uncomfortable but clearly wasn't, because his face was relaxed. His hands rested in his lap in a way that made it obvious he had made peace, long ago, with the way his hands worked. And his eyes found mine across about 15 feet of hallway and stopped. They were the exact warm brown of his mother's eyes. He made a sound, not a word, something older than a word. The sound a person makes when a thing they were not entirely sure was ever going to happen is suddenly happening. The woman, her name was Celestine, walked to the wheelchair. She put her hand on Marcus's shoulder. She said his name twice in the steady, practiced voice of a woman who had been saying his name that way for 22 years. She said, "Marcus, this is Raymond. This is the man your mother was married to." He looked at me. He made the sound again. I stood in the foyer of a farmhouse I had never set foot in a town I had never visited, on a Tuesday in late spring, and I spent the next 90 seconds trying to remember how to breathe. My name is Raymond Okafor. I am 55 years old. I used to run an HVAC and small appliance repair operation out of a converted garage on Outer Drive on the west side of Detroit. I have been fixing furnaces, window units, dishwashers, and washing machines for people in their homes for 28 years. I drove a 2016 Silverado with 190,000 miles on it and a driver's side window that fogged up in the rain, no matter what I did to the seal. My wife Renata was a senior accountant at a regional firm in Southfield. She died 14 months ago of pancreatic cancer. She was 53 years old. We were married for 23 years. In those 23 years, she made 276 drives to a farmhouse in Lenawee County, Michigan, 110 miles each way, on the third Saturday of every month, in a silver Honda Pilot she bought secondhand specifically for the round trip. She told me the first time we went to dinner that there was a place she was not ready to take anyone. She told me the first night we spent together that she would never take me there. She told me on our wedding day in the lobby of the church hall in Dearborn, surrounded by her mother's friends, that I should not, for the rest of our lives, ask about it. I did not ask, not once, not in 23 years. I want to tell you how I found out. An estate attorney named Gerald Finch called my cell phone about 6 months after Renata's funeral. Gerald is 64 years old. He has a firm on Woodward Avenue in Bloomfield Hills that handles trusts and estates for people with money. Renata was not the kind of woman you would have guessed had money. She drove a secondhand Pilot. She shopped at Meijer. She cut her own hair until she was 45, but she had money because for 23 years, she had been spending almost none of it on herself. Gerald told me he had some documents for me. He told me there was a letter. He said I should read the letter before I drove anywhere. He said, in the tired, measured voice of a man who has been delivering news like this for 30 years, that what I was about to learn was going to be hard, and that the woman I had been married to had loved me by his own honest reading of how she spoke about me in 12 years of attorney-client conversations more than I was going to feel like she had in the next several hours. I drove home. I sat at our kitchen table. I read the letter. I want you to hear it the way I heard it in her voice, at our table, at 9:30 in the morning with the coffee I hadn't finished going cold beside me. She wrote, "Raymond, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and Gerald has given you the keys, and you are about to learn the thing I should have told you 23 years ago. I am sorry. I have been trying for 23 years to find the right moment. I never found it. I am not sure one exists. I have a son. His name is Marcus. He is 37 years old. He was born when I was 16 in a hospital in the Ypsilanti on a night I have not once in 37 years been able to describe to anyone without crying. He was born with severe cerebral palsy. He cannot walk, he cannot speak in words, he cannot live independently, and by every medical assessment I have received in the last 3 decades, he will never be able to. He has lived for 30 years at my parents' farmhouse in Lenawee County, in the care of the women I hired and paid out of my own salary since I was 22 years old. I visited him on the 3rd Saturday of every month for 30 years. While you were home in Dearborn fixing appliances for people who needed you, I was sitting on a porch in Lenawee County with our son. I am sorry I lied to you about where I was going. I want you to know that the reason I did not tell you was not that I didn't trust you. I made a promise. I was 16 years old, sitting at my mother's kitchen table, and my parents asked me to carry this in silence for the rest of my life. My father was a man who believed silence was dignity. My mother was crying. I agreed. They died less than a year later. The promise outlived them. By the time I met you, it had been alive inside me for 12 years, and I did not know how to put it down. I tried to tell you on our second date. I lost my nerve. I tried the night before our wedding. I lost my nerve. I tried on your 40th birthday, the year your mother was sick, the morning we found out we couldn't have children together. Every single time, I lost my nerve. By the time I knew I was sick, the promise had calcified into something I couldn't explain, even to myself. The farmhouse is yours. The trust I set up will continue to pay Celestine and Dara for as long as Marcus is alive. You do not have to be his father. You are not obligated to anything. I gave up the right to ask you for anything the night I chose not to tell you he existed. I am only asking for one thing. Visit him once, just once, on a Saturday. He has a photograph of you on his bedside table. He has had it for 20 years. I told him about you. He knows your name. He knows your face. He has been waiting, in the patient way Marcus waits for things, to meet you. I am sorry. I loved you. I will love you for as long as anything of me is still anywhere. Renata. I sat at that kitchen table for 11 hours. I read the letter 4 times. The first time the way a man reads it when he is still trying to understand what it is telling him. The second time, after he understands. The third time, when he is angry. The 4th time, when he is no longer angry but does not yet know what he is instead. I thought about every 3rd Saturday of the last 23 years. I thought about the way she would pack the night before. The way she would leave at 6 in the morning without making coffee, which was not like her, because on every other morning she made coffee because, I understood now, she didn't want to wake me up with the smell of it and have to look me in the eye while she lied about where she was going. I thought about the quiet she came home with on Saturday evenings. The kind of quiet that wasn't tiredness and wasn't sadness exactly, but something I never had the right word for. Now I had the word. She had been sitting on a porch with her son all day, and she had come home to a husband who did not know he existed, and the gap between those 2 rooms of her life was so vast that silence was the only bridge she knew how to build across it. I thought about the fact that she told me on our 3rd date she didn't want children. I had accepted that. I had told myself I accepted it because I loved her, and the life we could have without children was still a good life. What I had not understood, what I could not have understood, was that she did not want children with me because she already had one. A son she loved. A son she was already raising. A son she could not bring home. I thought about all the times I noticed something in her and let it go. The way she held babies at other people's parties, not awkwardly. The way some women hold other people's babies, but with a quiet competence that I always attributed to her general steadiness. I thought about how she cried the year her Aunt Vera, the only surviving relative who knew the truth, died, a grief that seemed too large for a woman who had described Vera as distant. I thought about the way she looked sometimes on Sunday evenings, staring out the window at nothing, and how I would ask her what she was thinking and she would say, nothing, just tired, and I would believe her because I needed to believe her, and because it was easier than asking the question underneath the question. I thought about how I would never be able to apologize to her for any of the things I needed to apologize for. Because she was dead. And the dead do not receive apologies. They only receive what you do next. The sun came up at 5:50, 2 inches the morning. I made coffee. I drank 1 cup at the counter. I poured the rest in a thermos. I put on the blue canvas jacket I had been wearing on service calls for 9 years. I got in my truck. I want to be honest with you about something. I drove to that farmhouse with one plan. I was going to walk through the rooms, take photographs on my phone, and send them to a realtor in Tecumseh named Patricia Cole, who had been waiting 3 weeks for me to list the property. I was going to take the money, deposit it, and put a chapter of my life behind me that I had apparently been politely declining to examine for the better part of my adult life. That was the plan. I don't know exactly when I knew the plan wasn't going to happen. Maybe somewhere on M52 South, watching the farms come up out of the fog. Maybe in the parking lot of a small Lutheran church outside Blissfield, where I stopped for 8 minutes and read a sign that said, "He carried what we could not carry and didn't go inside." Maybe I already knew when I was sitting at the kitchen table at midnight reading the letter for the third time, in the middle of being angry, and the anger started to feel less like anger and more like grief, wearing the wrong coat. I got to the farmhouse a little after 10 in the morning. From the road it looked like this: white 2-story wraparound porch, tin roof with new flashing on the south seam. The paint was clean, not fresh, but maintained, year after year, the way someone maintains a house they intend to keep. The porch had been reinforced at the corners with steel brackets. There was a wheelchair ramp on the north side, built from pressure-treated lumber, with a handrail that had been recently sanded. As a man who has spent 28 years walking into other people's homes and reading what the condition of a building tells you about the person who lives inside it, I can tell you, this was not a house anyone was neglecting. This was a house someone had been caring for, carefully, steadily, for a very long time. I sat in the driveway for 4 minutes. I looked at the ramp. I looked at the porch. I looked at the curtains in the front windows, white curtains with a faint pattern. Clean, recently laundered. I looked at the thin column of smoke rising from the chimney. I got out of the truck. I walked up the ramp. I knocked. Nobody answered. I tried the knob. It was unlocked. And then Celestine stood up from the kitchen chair. The 4 hours that followed were the longest and quietest of my life. Celestine, 59 years old, from Baton Rouge originally, with the unhurried patience of a woman who has been doing the hardest kind of care work for 2 decades, made me coffee. She sat down across from me. She told me she had been preparing for this conversation since November, when Renata called her from the cancer ward and told her what to say. She told me everything. She told me that Marcus was born in 1987 at a hospital in Ypsilanti. She told me his father was a 23-year-old auto parts worker from Pontiac named Leon Briggs, who visited the hospital once, looked at his newborn son, and drove to Atlanta 3 weeks later. He never came back. He died of a stroke 11 years ago. He never came back. She told me about Renata's parents, Jerome and Vivienne Tate, children of a generation that believed family pain was private property, and private property did not get shared outside the fence line. They were not cold people. Jerome was a deacon. Vivienne taught Sunday school for 30 years. They were people who had absorbed the belief from their own parents and their parents before them that certain kinds of shame had to be carried inward, quietly, until they became indistinguishable from character. They sat their 16-year-old daughter down at the kitchen table and asked her to carry this in silence. They were not cruel. They were frightened. They were certain this was the only way the family survived. They died 14 months later. A head-on collision on I-94 outside Jackson, Michigan, in November rain. A truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel. Renata was 17 years old, single mother of a severely disabled 1-year-old, and the only 2 people in the world who knew her secret were gone. I want to stop here for a second, because I need to be honest with you about what I was feeling sitting at that kitchen table listening to Celestine talk. I was not, in that moment, angry at Renata. The anger had burned off somewhere on M52 inches the fog. What I was feeling was something I don't have a clean word for, a kind of vertigo, like the floor of the last 23 years had tilted just enough to show me that everything I had understood about my marriage was true, and at the same time, not the whole truth. Not even close to the whole truth. Celestine told me Renata almost didn't survive her early 20s, that at 22, alone, working days and taking night classes to finish her accounting degree, paying caregivers out of cash while her son lived in a farmhouse she inherited from dead parents, forbidden by a promise she had made to those dead parents from telling a single living person the truth, she had reached a point that she could not see past. A social worker at a county hospital in Jackson, a woman named Ruthie McAdams, was the person who pulled her back. Ruthie helped her set up the care rotation, helped her arrange the trust, helped her understand that the life she was going to have to live was going to require her to build 2 lives, one in Lenawee County, one wherever she went next, and that both of them had to be real, had to be worth something, or neither of them was going to survive. Renata moved to Detroit. She got the accounting job. She met me, eventually, at a church picnic in Dearborn where her friend Paulette dragged her because she needed to get out of the apartment. She was 29. She told me on our second date about the farmhouse. Not the truth, just that there was a place she wasn't ready to take anyone. I believed her, because she asked me to. I want to tell you about the 2 hours I sat with Marcus. Celestine walked me into the living room after the kitchen conversation and left us. Marcus was in his wheelchair by the window. The television was on a children's program, the kind with bright colors and simple songs, and his face in the light of it was relaxed, content, the face of a man who is exactly where he expects to be. He looked at me. He made the sound. The one I'd heard in the hallway, the one that was not a word but was older than a word. He pointed. His hand didn't cooperate fully with what he was trying to do, but his intention was completely clear. He was pointing at the side table to his left. There was a framed photograph on it. I walked over and looked at it. It was me. It was a photograph Renata had taken of me about 11 years ago at the company's summer picnic in Southfield. I was holding a plate of food. I was laughing, genuinely laughing at something her colleague had just said. I was wearing a green polo shirt I had donated to Goodwill 4 years ago. I had been in this house, in that photograph, for 11 years. I had been in this house longer than I had known I was supposed to be here. I sat down in the chair next to Marcus's wheelchair. I picked up the local paper that was folded on the end table, the Lenawee County paper, not the Free Press. I opened it to the front page. I started reading out loud. I don't know exactly why I did that. Celestine had mentioned he liked to be read to. I suppose it was the only thing I knew how to offer. My hands have always known how to do things, how to diagnose a failing compressor, how to reseat a drum belt, how to hold a crescent wrench in a space that wasn't designed for it. Sitting in that chair, with this man beside me, was the first time in a long time I didn't know what my hands were for. So I read. I read him 3 articles: a county road project, a school board vote, a story about a dairy farmer outside Adrian who had won a regional competition. Marcus listened. He made sounds at intervals, quieter ones, not the arriving sound from the hallway, but something more like a breathing rhythm, a settling. Celestine appeared in the doorway once, looked at us, and disappeared again without speaking. At some point, Marcus looked from me to the photograph and back to me. He made a sound that Celestine, from the kitchen, called out the translation for without being asked. She said it was the sound he made when he recognized something he had been waiting a long time to see. I did not leave that chair for 90 minutes. I drove back to Detroit that night. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table of the house I had shared with Renata for 23 years, with her letter in front of me and the lights on, and I stayed there until the sun came up again. And then I made a decision. I am not the kind of man who could have told you, at 55 years old, what kind of man he was. I fixed things for a living. I showed up. I did the work. I charged a fair price. I went home. I did not think of myself as a person who made large decisions. My large decisions had mostly been made for me by the ordinary accumulations of a working life. This neighborhood, this garage, this truck, this woman I loved, this marriage. But I made a large decision at that kitchen table. I was not going to move Marcus to a facility. I was not going to sell that farmhouse. I was not going to let a man who had a photograph of me on his bedside table for 11 years spend the rest of his life waiting for a third Saturday visit from someone who didn't know he was waiting. I sold the business to my nephew Terrence, who had been working for me for 8 years and had been quietly hoping I would let him buy it for the last 3. I sold the house in Dearborn to a young couple who were expecting their first child in the fall. I packed what mattered and drove to Lenawee County. I moved into the farmhouse on a Thursday in September. The months that followed rebuilt me from the inside. I learned Celestine and Dara's rhythms. Dara was the weekend caregiver, a quiet woman from Monroe with 20 years in disability care and a laugh that surprised me every time. I learned how to transfer Marcus from his wheelchair to his bed without hurting either of us, which took 3 weeks of daily practice and one near fall that Celestine pretended not to see. I learned what he liked for breakfast, what sounds the television made that he tolerated, and which ones he didn't. I learned that he liked the windows open in the morning and the blinds half closed in the afternoon. I learned that the dairy farm half a mile down the road had cows that made sounds on still mornings that Marcus could hear from the porch, and that those sounds made him content in a way that was visible in his face. I learned, in the slow, patient way you learn anything that matters, what my wife had been doing on the third Saturday of every month for 23 years. 3 weeks ago, something happened on the porch. It was a Saturday morning. Third Saturday. I had been at the farmhouse for 6 months. I was on the front porch with Marcus, who was in his wheelchair beside me, and Celestine, who had brought us out coffee and a carton of vanilla pudding. She had been spoon-feeding to Marcus since he was about 12. The sun was fully up. The cows were doing what cows do on Saturday mornings. I was reading the front page of the paper to Marcus, a story about the county expanding a rural broadband program, and Marcus was making the sound he makes when he is content, a low, rhythmic exhalation that I had, over 6 months, come to think of as the sonic equivalent of a man leaning back in a comfortable chair. I looked at him for a minute. I looked at the photograph of Renata on the side table inside the front window, the one Celestine had moved from Marcus's bedroom to the front room on the day I arrived, so he could see it from the porch chair. Renata at maybe 45, standing in what looked like late autumn light, laughing at something below the frame of the photograph. And something shifted in me. For 23 years, I had understood I was married to a private woman. I had understood that her parents died when she was young and she didn't like to discuss it. I had understood she was careful with money, careful with words, careful with everything. I had understood she did not want children, and I had accepted that and built a life around it that I told myself was complete. I did not understand. I could not have understood that every single thing I had accepted and accommodated and interpreted about my wife was explained by a single fact I didn't have. She was raising a son she couldn't tell me about. The privacy was not about me. The money she saved was for him. The trips were for him. The quiet she came home with on Saturday evenings was the quiet of a woman crossing from one room of her life to another and not knowing how to explain the crossing. She didn't want children with me because she already had one. She kept her professional life separate because her personal life was already the most separate thing imaginable. She cried the year her Aunt Vera died because Vera was the only living person she could speak to about Marcus. And when Vera died, she lost that too. She was not hiding from me. She was carrying. I want to tell you what I told her that morning on the porch. I said it quietly, in the voice a man uses when he is talking to someone who has been dead for 14 months and cannot answer back, but might he tells himself be listening anyway. I told her I had been wrong about her. I told her I had spent 23 years thinking I was married to a private person and discovering now that I had been married to the strongest person I had ever known. I told her I was sorry I never understood the difference, and that if I had known, if I had been the kind of man who could have been trusted with it, I would have driven to this farmhouse with her on every third Saturday for 23 years. I would have read the paper on the porch. I would have learned the sounds. Marcus made the sound he makes when he is content. I went back to reading the front page. The cows kept going. Celestine went inside to start lunch, and I sat on the porch of the farmhouse. My wife kept secret from me for the full length of our marriage. Next to the sun, she kept secret from me for the same length of time, and I finished my coffee. It was about 9:30 in the morning, the third Saturday of the month, the same morning she had been living on this porch for 30 years without me. A school bus came down the county road a little after 10. It slowed in front of the driveway, 2 houses down, to pick up a couple of kids. Marcus watched it. His face changed in the particular way it changes when he sees that bus, a kind of brightening, like a lamp turning up by 1 degree. He made a sound I hadn't heard before. Celestine, from inside, called out without being asked. That's his bus sound. He's been making that sound at that bus for as long as I've worked here. I made a note in my head to be on the porch tomorrow morning at the same time. I was going to learn the sound. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to take a second before you answer. Because I don't think this question is as simple as it sounds. What did the person you loved most carry alone? Not what did they hide from you, what did they carry? And when did you find out, and what did you do with what you learned? Drop it in the comments. 1 sentence is enough. I read every single one. I have been thinking a lot, since the morning on that porch, about how many lives are running in parallel to the lives we think we know. How many people sitting across from you at dinner, sleeping in the bed next to you, calling you on a Sunday afternoon, how many of them are carrying a room you've never been invited into? Not because they don't trust you, not because they don't love you, but because they made a promise when they were too young to know how long promises last, and by the time they met you, the promise was older than the love, and they did not know how to rearrange the furniture. Some of those rooms are small. Some of them are farmhouses in Lenawee County with wheelchair ramps and clean curtains, and a man inside who has had your photograph for 11 years. I'm not telling you this story because I have it figured out. I don't. I am a 55-year-old man who fixes appliances, who used to fix appliances, who drove to a farmhouse one Tuesday morning to sell it and instead moved into it, and is still, 14 months after his wife's death, learning what she knew all along. What I know is this: the people we love are not fully visible to us. They never are. You can share a bed with someone for 23 years and still not know the room they slip into on the third Saturday of every month. That is not a failure of love. It is a fact about human beings. We are all, every one of us, carrying something we have not yet found the right words for. The question is not whether the person you love is carrying something, they are. The question is whether, if they found a way to show you, you would stay. If you would stay, tell someone today. Not the secret, not the whole thing, just that you would stay. Sometimes that is the only key that opens the door. Comment 1 if you think Raymond, that's me, did the right thing by moving to the farmhouse. Comment 2 if you think it was the wrong call, and he was asked to carry something that wasn't his to carry. Comment 3 if, like me, you think there is no right answer, only the one you can live with. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, because that matters to me more than you'd think. If this story hit you somewhere quiet, somewhere you weren't expecting, share it. Don't caption it. Just send it to the person who came to mind when I asked what they were carrying. Let them decide what it means. And if you're new here, this channel is where I come to work things out. Subscribe if you want to work things out with me. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Detroit, Michigan to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.